And range mask is actually what we're going to use for the first part of this demo. What those range masks really do is they allow you to select portions of the image based on its luminosity. It's not really that different than if I went up here to the select menu and I did color range, and I could come down and say I want to select all of my highlights, and if I hit OK, you'd see we come out and the entire sky has been selected because it's all a highlight. Or I could come in and go select color range, and instead of highlights I want to get all of the midtones. And you'll see now that a whole lot more of that image is selected. Everywhere where there's midtones has been there. Now what the range masks do is take that a step further. So instead of just having a selection for brights, you actually have a selection for 6 degrees of bright, 6 degrees of dark, and up to 6 degrees of midtone, although you'll find that practically you usually only have 5. To get to this, you want to open up, if you're using Raya Pro, open up the panel and you'll see that you're on this first tab called Blend. Now by default it opens up to quick blending, which is something you can use if you have multiple exposures and have bracketed images. It gives you a very realistic type of HDR-like quality, but we only have the one image that we're going to work with, so we're going to switch quick blending down to luminosity mask. Now inside luminosity mask you're going to see we have a create all and a delete all, and we also have the ability to individually create just the brights, just the darks, or the midtones. We're going to go ahead and hit create all just to get all 18 of these channels created. And channels is exactly what it does. So it's fired off the action up here, and then if we go out and we look at our layers, switch it over to the channels tab, you'll see that now in addition to the RGB we also have all of these other channels. And if you want to see what any of these look like in more detail, you can click on it and see, okay, that's what's in Brights 1, here's what's in Brights 5. And this is a good way to really tell what they're doing behind the scenes. So Brights 1, you'll see, is a good portion of the image. It's every bit of the image that has any kind of brightness at all really in it. As we go down and those numbers get higher, you'll see we have less and less selected. So that by the time we're down to Brights 5 and Brights 6, we really only have the sun and the very whitest clouds. Everything else has, gone into the rest of the image. The same thing happens if we look at darks. We'll see that darks 1 has only that stuff. When we get to the darks, it's only got the darkest. So it's, again, you're working your way to the most extreme of that. Midtones 1 might actually have something in this. Usually that one's going to be empty. Midtones 2. And as you get to midtone 6, you're getting closer and closer to the bright. But we don't want to see it that way. We want to come back up here. We want to get to RGB. We don't want to, anytime you're working with range mask and you have them in channels and you start seeing some wicked pink on your screen, know that what you've probably accidentally done is turned on visibility for one of those, and all you have to do to get rid of it is come back in and click on that eyeball to turn it back off. If you're doing this with the easy panel, with the free version, you get those masks by just hitting that first button, Create Luminosity Mask. But this is where it gets a little different between the easy panel free version and the Raya Pro. So in Raya Pro, one of the things that I often do with a landscape image just right off the bat is I add some contrast to my midtones. And I do that because I think the raw image out of camera is often fairly flat. And so I'll come in and I'll select, you'll see there's not really anything in midtones 1. When we go to midtones 2, we have a lot. And so I like to select midtones 2 and do an adjustment to just that. If you are working inside of the easy panel, you have to do a little more work to get your selection. So you can't just hit a handy button that says, oh, I want midtones 2. No, you have to come over, go to your channels, you've got to find where midtones 2 is, and I believe, is it command and click? Yes, command and click on the image itself, not the eyeball, and you'll get your marching ants for that. So that's the same thing as just hitting the number out here. A lot of times that first adjustment I'll try just to see what it does is I'll come in, I'll pull up my adjustments window. If you don't have that open, go up to Window, Adjustments, and pick it up. And I'll just do a simple curves adjustment. Now when I do this, the curves adjustment is only going to affect the area I had selected in midtones 2. So my brights aren't going to change. You won't see a change in the sun. You won't see a change down here in these really dark foreground bushes. When we hit this, and we'll just jump in with strong contrast, you're just going to see that all through the middle of the image we get a little more dimension. Similarly, we could go and use some of these presets if we wanted to make the image darker, and we could make it darker, we could make it lighter. A lot of ways this really works kind of like the blending modes do, except instead of applying itself to the entire layer, it's only applying it to the selection. You also have the ability to just adjust these things using the curve itself. And of course, the sharper the curve, the more contrast you have. So the more like a hockey stick it looks, the more extreme that contrast is going to be. So if you're not sure, it's usually best just to stay with one of the presets. So for now, I'm going to stick with medium contrast. It hasn't done as much as I would like to help this image really pop. And I think it's just because of the tonality we have in the picture itself. So now, I'm going to keep it easy and just click on the numbers in here, but no, you can always go to channels if you're in easy panel land. And let's just see what happens when we play with some of these others. When I select darks, you can see that most of the forest is actually in darks. And I really would like to have the extra dimension come out there. I want to see a little bit of the details in the leaves. I want to see some more of the details in the ridge lines that go through. So we can get that by selecting darks 2. We get a lot of that. If we come down to the end, we see that dark 6 and darks 5 are where you really see those bushes. And, you know, looking at it, I think I have enough information in those foreground bushes. I don't want them to become any more prominent. So here's where the advantage of Raya Pro comes in. With Raya Pro, it is very simple to say, okay, I am going to select darks 2, but I really only want 2, 3, and 4. I don't want 5 and 6. So if I come down and do subtract with 5, you're going to see it's pulled back on that foreground, and the foreground is no longer part of my selection. So now I've really just gotten kind of the edges of the trees in the forest, and I'm going to come in one more time and try to do a curves adjustment here and see what happens. Now when I go strong contrast, well, you can see that a big difference happened there, but it's just kind of made it all darker. I didn't get the definition I wanted. So sometimes you want to go lighter to see a little more detail in it. And maybe then we'll start dragging in on this just a little bit to see how much contrast we can get in there. And now you can start to see how down here in the hazy land, we are starting to see the individual trees and the treetops. So remember, when you're doing this, you actually want to move the individual points around a little bit on this line. And you can see as I do that, how much it changes it. So I am trying to keep them all fairly close down here for right now, because I think with just this image, that's where it's working best. Let's see, and I don't want it to be too steep at the top, because then I start losing them in the background. Okay, I think that's all right. I don't know what would happen if we did it again and subtracted from it again, and this time we did the adjustment to make it darker. Let's see. Now we kind of have a little bit of the best of both worlds in there. What you can do after you do these adjustments is it's not all or nothing. So you can see each of these adjustments creates a new layer. It's called an adjustment layer, believe it or not. And you can turn them on and off individually. What it will do, though, is give them curves 1, curves 2, curves 3. So as you go along, you might want to remember what they were. So this was my midtones. This was light and darks. And this was actually dark and darks, because we like to contradict ourselves sometimes. And then you can go and make further edits, really, to each of those layers. So I could decide, you know what, I really don't like that. I could say, well, maybe I like it, but not with this other lighter underneath it. Something else you can do, and sometimes I'll do this, is I'll play with the opacity of one. So I want a little bit of it, but not too much of it. So opacity is a good way to do that. You can also come in, so sometimes, and in fact here, we'll go do that. So let me get rid of these two darks, because we're going to create another one. If we had come in here, and this is something you're going to want to do if you've got the easy panel version, so you don't have the ability to easily subtract one channel selection from another. So in easy panel land, we might come here into our channels and say, okay, I want darks 2, so we'd hit command and darks 2, and we don't have the ability to easily leave that area out. So I might come in, get my curves tool, do that increase contrast adjustment, but make it lighter. Let's do that. Whoops, wrong way. So I might do this adjustment there, and you know, I kind of like what it's done to the trees, but I don't like what it did to the foreground, and I wasn't able to leave it out. So what I can do to address that is I can come here to this mask it's made, and it turns out this is a mask just like any other mask. So I can paint on it and make further refinements. So I can get my brush tool, and I want to conceal what has happened. So I want to conceal the changes that were made, because if we look before, you can see how you have much more detail than you do now. Which means to conceal, that's black. Black conceals, white reveals. And I'm going to come in here and just paint right on that, and just kind of take out everything it did. And if I decide that looks washed out and I want a little bit of it on, this is a good time to play with your flow and your opacity. So we'll put our flow there. You know, we can come in here, we can see we've got a pretty soft one, but we can make it even softer around the edges. We could also come down to here, get our quick select wand, and just drag it over that really quickly, because those dark areas are so easy to quick select. So we could do that. We got to come in and refine it just a little bit right around there. There we go. It's a mask. It doesn't have to be perfect in this kind of situation, so we could come back up here, click on this area, and we could just literally fill it in, so that you don't have, whoops, wrong way. There we go. So that it gets hidden. Did I do that right? No, I didn't. Let me see. Where is my option? Delete should fill it in. There we go. And you can see I still need to come and touch it up in just a couple of spaces. But you get how that works. Let's not fill it that way, because when we filled it 100%, and I don't want it to fill it 100%. What I want to do is to come down here and paint in with a little brush at a low flow. And you can see I've done it with the big brush, so that didn't work. Now we'll get the itty bitty brush. We'll do that instead. And we'll go around the edge first. Once we go around the edge, if we want to turn the flow up for the rest of it, we can. It's really washed out though, so we're still going to have to do something else for that. We shall worry about it later though. And of course you can see right here I went a little too far, so I'm just literally going to hit X to get the white paint back, and I'm going to touch up around the edge where I kind of overstepped my bounds a little bit. This is one of those places too where I think it depends what you're going to do with the image. You've got to be, you know, if we want to print this out and put it on a wall somewhere ultimately, then we have to be a little bit more aware of the edges of the trees here. And in that case, you want to take the time to go ahead and zoom in and make sure that you're getting every bit of them so that there's some consistency. And you'll find that here I've got to do the reverse. I've got to switch the paint. So I have one finger on my mouse pad dragging this around. The other one is hovering over the X, so I can swap foreground and background colors back and forth pretty easily, because you'll see that you just have to keep doing that in some of these little areas of detail. You're also going to have to be willing to kind of keep changing your brush size as you go. And despite having a trackpad, I always have to hit a button to change my brush size. I just don't don't really do well with the magic slide the fingers. Okay. So that's the first thing we've done. We've done a basic adjustment to our midtones and to our darks. So now it's always good to take a look and see what happens with the lights. I know one of the comments I got from a lot of you based on the kind of out of camera JPEG of this image was that you really wanted to see more intensity from the orange. And I know that you're really used to going to the HSL land to bring out some of that. But we have to be careful because we want to intensify the oranges, and darkening it is the best way to do it. But if we darken too much, all of these whites are going to get blown out super quick. And so we're going to come in here, and again, so if we select all the brights, it has everything. If we get down to 6, it really only has those. And so this is a case where I think I want to select all of the brights, but I do not want to include areas 5 or 6. So now the brightest clouds and the sun are no longer part of the adjustment. Now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to do the same thing you saw me do. There are other things you can do with these selections. You can apply other adjustments to it, but for the most part, a curves adjustment does a whole lot to flatten up, to like make some pop come into that raw file. So, and I like to go to strong contrast pretty quickly. You can see it did intensify the pinks. It didn't do quite as much as I thought it would. When we auto tone, you can see it's making it even lighter. So this is one where, again, I'm going to drag in on it and see. And now as I drag, you can see how it's darkening all of that up. And in fact, we can go way down here and whoo! Isn't that like somebody has been tripping on acid? There we go. That's a really lovely orange. I think it is still too much contrast compared to the brightest areas. And I really hate what it's done with the pink. So we could come in and try to fix it with the mask if we wanted to. Or we could say, you know what, let's go with let's go with darker. We'll make it darker, and you can see it's all getting a little more dark from that. You can't really go insanely dark without starting to drag these with you. And so if we can take it, if we take this back, nope, it's not going to do it. We're going to have to drag everything down. So you can see if I just drag it out like this, how flat it gets, how much dimension gets lost. Which is why you tend to like kind of create a point and drag them down with you. There we go. Now I'm still not in love with the pink. We're still gonna have to do something about that. But I think we now have a nice shade of orange, and I love the way it goes into orange and blue and then green, and nice subtle transitions there. So I'm going to come back out. This was my highlights. Highlights darker, and this was my dark slider. So if I go back to my highlights darker here, and I get my brush tool again, and we'll go ahead and zoom in to start with here. We can come out here and we can paint again over that, and you can see as I do that, that we got to be careful because I don't like the haloing that comes from just painting on it, so we're gonna have to turn the flow way down. And this is one where it might actually be best to start here in the center where we aren't doing anything and just slowly go outside just a little bit. Whoops, we just went too far there, so do it just a little bit at a time. There we go. We can put a little bit here and a little bit here. I think we also have just a little too much there, but that's still too much flow. So you might also have to turn opacity down a little. I try to do flow first, but I'm not beyond using both of those buttons. I know that there are some folks who don't use both of them. They like to just stick with flow. And that's one where I got too much, so let's make it go down even more, and we'll paint back over it with the black. Okay, so I think our pink is much less intense now. We'll pull back out, and we can see, before, after. Yeah, those pinks are really kind of there. We just have to be careful with them. I've got white right now. Do I want white there? Maybe. There we go. Nope, I wanted black. Let's see, I hit it too much, so we've got a few little circles coming across there. But we'll just take them out like that. So now pretty quickly, what we've done is we have gone from this image, which was pretty washed out, didn't have a lot of color, didn't have a lot of intensity, didn't have much detail at all, and we have layered in levels of color and detail. And it's taken all of those to do it. So making those darks lighter, it took making those midtones have more contrast, and making those highlights darker. Now this is one where I made the midtones have more contrast. If you change your mind, you're like, well, what if we, instead of making them have more contrast, what if we had made that darker instead? Sorry, I hit the wrong button. If you hit the mask, it opens up mask and select. If you hit the little adjustment thing, it opens your thing back up. So you can see, oh yeah, I did that medium contrast. Let's see what happens if I took it lighter. What if I took it darker? So you can come back and play with that and see where the happiest place is, because your opinion on that may well change once you have some of these other adjustments layered in. You know, looking at them, I think the two adjustments I think all three of them work well together. You can see they're each affecting a different range of the image. Now we're not done with this by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a good start and a good place for us to step into the next level of refinement, which we can also do with our tool here, so stay tuned.